Bienvenidos and welcome back to another segment of La Plática. This is on Latino USA TV and Arizona Barrio Stories. This is Dr. Jose Leyba, bringing you stories from our community through the lens of our people. Stories about our culture, our language, and also the politics. Right now, a big issue, as you well know, is migration. And with the new administration coming on, who knows what's going to happen. What we have our guest today is an award-winning author, Reyna Grande. And she has a unique story about being a migrant family also that were able to get their citizenship. But what we want to do is find out your perspectives, how you grew up, and then what motivated you to get an education, and then how do you get inspired to write? So welcome, Reina. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, my story is not unique. This is a story that many people have experienced when it comes to immigration, family separation, and border crossings. My experience is like many children. My parents left. They came here to the United States, and my siblings and I were left behind in Guerrero for many years.
Mm-hmm. How many years were you separate from parents?
Over 7.
7 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
My father was 2 when he left, and I was 9, 9.5 when he came back, and he hired a smuggler to sneak us across the border. And that's how my siblings and I ended up in California, reunited with our parents. But pretty soon we realized that family separation takes a toll on the family. We couldn't function the same again, and it took a long time for us to finally start to get to know each other. But it was definitely a very traumatic experience of being separated from our parents.
And I think that's a real issue with our community right now, the fear that's happening in our community. I received a text from a group of activists that said, oh, they're stopping high school students in such a high school.
Yeah.
And I had to get on the phone with the principal and find out, was that the case? And it wasn't. So we were able to dispel that rumor. But the trauma you talked about, our audience needs to understand the trauma that you went through in order to get here and how it affected families. So
yeah, no, and it's something that schools really need to be aware of, educators, administrators, because that's how we know how to help families. And there is a lot of trauma and anxiety and chronic stress that our families are under because of that fear of deportation, the fear of being separated once again, the fear that children show up with at school that really impacts their learning. And so for us to be more informed in terms of that trauma and how can we help our families, how can we provide more mental health services to families, it's going to really help, because when we don't have a way to process our trauma, to learn like coping skills, to have more open conversations and dialogues, it leads to a lot of addiction, alcoholism, child abuse and neglect, domestic violence in our community. So we really need to deal with that in order for us to have healthier families and children that can thrive in school and in society.
And you make a very valid point. During my tenure as superintendent of schools, I had one school that was number 1 on the City of Phoenix list for domestic abuse calls to the City of Phoenix Police Department. It was largely a migrant population. So with all that trauma, all that separation, all that anxiety, what was your motivation to get an education? My understanding is you went to film school, and you're also a talented filmmaker in addition to being a talented author.
Well, my motivation was my father. When he brought us to the U.S., he always said, I brought you here so that you could get an education, so that you can get ahead. And he was very, very firm about that. And so he expected nothing less than perfect attendance and perfect grades from us.
Gracias. ¿Tu papá?
Sí.
¿Cómo se llama tu papá?
Natalio.
Natalio. Muchas gracias, Natalio.
Sí.
You've grown a leader, a fearless leader.
Yeah, so my father taught me to dream. He taught me to dream big. He always talked about, he wanted us to have careers, to be working professionals. He wanted us to be homeowners. He wanted us to have a retirement. And I was a little girl when he would talk about those things, but he taught me that we needed to make those plans for the future and how to dream with my eyes open, And I definitely felt that I had opportunities, the opportunity to be here, and I couldn't waste that. And I really wanted my life, my future, to be better than what my life had been, my past. And that made me work very hard because I knew that there were some cycles in my family that I wanted to break, and one of them was a lack of education, because my parents, my grandparents, they didn't have the opportunity to go to school. My grandfather was illiterate because he never went to school, and my father only went to the 3rd grade, and my mother the 6th grade. And so I knew that if I could break that cycle, that would impact the next generation. And so I became the first in my family to go to university. And now we have 3 of my nieces have graduated from university. So now the new generation is having access to higher education. And I think that's important. And so we need to, sometimes we're the ones that are the ones that, are machetazos. We need to create a path for the next generation.
Well, I would call it something else, okay? But yes, you're exactly right. Now, you were one of the guest speakers today at the Common Ground on the Border Issues Conference, where there are representatives from all over the U.S. here. Now, let's talk about your books briefly. And which book were you presenting today?
Well, we mostly talked about The Distance Between Us, which is my memoir, and it's the story of my siblings and I being separated from our parents. So half of the book takes place in Mexico, and it really gives the reader insight into that experience of the children who are left behind. And then I write about my border crossing, and then the second half of the book is about being in this country as an undocumented child immigrant and coming of age under those circumstances, and fighting for us to have opportunities and to get ahead, and not just survive in this country, but to thrive in this country.
Now, you talked about migration right now being an American story. Why is that?
Well, because sometimes when we talk about immigration, we often talk about the Latino immigrant. And what people forget is that we're not the only immigrants in this country, that migration is the American story, and there's been immigrants from all over the world that have come here.
Absolutely.
And so we need to acknowledge that. We also have to acknowledge that when we talk about undocumented immigrants, our community is not the only one that has undocumented migration. There's a lot of white people here who are also undocumented. And then there's, a lot of in the Asian community that are undocumented. And so for me, it's important for us to really talk about migration in terms of a global experience, and to be welcoming and to understand that diversity, right, that the migrants bring to this country that's what really makes this country thrive.
Right,
it's the
right.
ecosystem of diversity, and everybody bringing their own talents and their skills and their passions and their hard work to make this country what it is.
And I can't overemphasize to our viewers the fact that it is an American story, because migrants come in all shades and all colors. Unfortunately, our community, are the ones that are facing the negative legislation here in Arizona, Prop 314, and nationally, the Lincoln-Riley Act, that will have a devastating impact on us.
Right.
Right now, I would be able to be stopped without any due process.
Right.
Just because of the color of my skin and the way that I look.
Exactly.
And so I think your books are, for me, it's almost like a healing. It's affirming who I am, who our people are, and making me feel good about that. Was that part of your intent in writing?
Well, I definitely wanted readers to connect with the story, to see themselves, because books can offer solace, comfort, and encouragement, and empowerment too. And I think it's important for us in our community to see our stories as part of American literature. and to know that our stories are important and we need to keep telling them and we need to keep writing about them and to see ourselves.
As we close, we have a couple of minutes. I know you have a very interesting story about getting onto Oprah Winfrey's network. How did that happen? The book network that she.
I mean, well, unfortunately, I was not invited to participate in her show because of my work.
Right.
You know, it was because of a controversy surrounding another book about Mexican migration that she selected for her book club that was written by a non-Mexican, non-immigrant author. But mostly for me, it was an important conversation that we needed to have in terms of the double standard of the publishing industry and how, with immigrant authors, they turn us away. You know, a lot of times they don't want our immigrant stories, or so they don't publish us, or when they do publish us, they don't really do enough to promote our work. And the media doesn't really pay a lot of attention to our immigrant stories. And definitely Oprah has never paid attention to our immigrant stories. And she's never selected a Mexican or an author of Mexican or a Latino author, except for like Isabel Allende and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which are part of the mainstream. So for me, it was definitely very hurtful when she took an interest in Mexican migration and she picked a book that was not an authentic story of migration. But again, like it was never anything to do against the author,
Right.
but it was more about how
Industry.
the industry itself, and Oprah's part of that industry, and the double standard in that industry, and how they're the ones who choose whose voices are elevated and whose voices are silenced and marginalized.
And that's why we're glad to have Reyna Grande here, a well-known author who's written about the migrant experience, because you're hearing it from someone that was smuggled across. You came across with a coyote. You were separated from your family. You've gone through all the fear and the negative effects on the family as a result of the separation. And so that's what we try to do here at Latino USA TV and Arizona Barrio Stories, bring you our Chicano, Mexicano, Latino experience through eyes like wonderful people like Reyna Grande. As we close, do you have any parting comments for our audience?
Well, I mean, we got to keep fighting. You know, we have to come together as a community. We have to put our differences aside and to support one another, because everything that's going to happen with this new administration is going to impact all of us, our families. And so we need to come together and to fight together.
Thank you. Once again, this is Dr. Jose Leyba with Arizona Barrio Stories, Latino USA TV, where we bring you stories told through our lens, through someone that's experienced that. So stay tuned with us. We're going to bring you more stories about the migrant issues. Educate yourself, learn about the politics of it, learn about what's happening here at this Common Ground Border Conference. You can see much of the memorabilia of actual migrants that have crossed. And as a former kid that worked in the fields, I remember this, okay? So once again, we will see you at our next program on Latino USA TV and Arizona Barrio Stories. Muchas gracias, Reyna.
Muchas gracias a ti.
Gracias.
Yes.